Gracious Heavenly Father, I thank you for each person who's gathered here today. God, we ask that as we gather that you would send your Spirit to meet with us, to help grow us, to help stretch us. Father, I pray that you would send your Spirit to give me the words to speak and to open up the ears and the hearts of those who need to hear this particular message today. We pray this in your Son's precious and holy name. And all God's people said, So a few summers ago, I had somebody knock at the door. And in my household, I am the one who has been elected to deal with all solicitors. And so I opened the door, and before the guy could get a word out, I cut him off. I said, if you're selling me solar panels, you're like the 20th guy in the neighborhood. The answer is no. And he said, I'm not selling solar panels. I said, okay, great. What can I do for you? He said, I'm selling security systems. I'm like, oh my gosh. And the guy was good too, because 2 hours later, I had signed a multi-year deal for a brand new security system. And I liked the security system. But a few weeks after getting it installed, I was having problems getting the Ring doorbell camera to connect to my app. And so I called the customer support line. Well, I got the dreaded message. I know you've heard it, because every company uses this exact same one. We're sorry, but due to an unexpected call volume, we're experiencing a longer wait time. Please stay on the line for the next available customer service representative to take your call. I don't know what the introduction of hell looks or sounds like, but I have a feeling it's somewhere along those lines. Due to an unexpected call volume, you're going to have to wait. And I know they were lying, because I called at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. They were not having a run on security systems at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. So I'm walking around the church, and my staff goes, is that jazz music we hear? I was like, yes, I'm on hold. I was on hold for 2 hours before somebody picked up. And I got on the line with the person and explained to them what I was dealing with. I explained to them I was frustrated. They said, we're going to have to pass you off to a customer service manager. They put me back on hold. And the automated system went click. I had to start the entire process over again. So by the time I got a hold of a customer service manager, I unloaded. I was so frustrated. My patience was shot. My civility was minimal. It was less than a Christ-like moment for me. I think I had every right to be upset. They wasted a lot of my time. And I heard the same stinking song over and over and over and over again. But here's the thing. When you surrender to Jesus, you surrender your rights to some other things as well. Paul, in the book of Galatians, names some of the things that we are called to surrender in order to follow Jesus. And he gives it to us as a list. Here's the list from the New Living Translation. Sexual immorality, impurity, lustful pleasures, idolatry, sorcery, hostility, quarreling, jealousy, outburst of anger, selfish ambition, dissension, division, envy, drunkenness, wild parties. And then he just goes, and other sins like these. It's like, it's just too many to name. Just if it's in this vein, just like, don't do that. And so before Paul gives us a list of what we call the fruit of the Spirit, which all throughout this series we have defined as the evidence of our growing life with Jesus, before he gets to that list, he talks about all of the things that we need to let go of. And he named them. Now, I said last week that the fruit of the Spirit it comes in seasons. I compared it to actual fruit. Fruit is seasonal. You can buy it out of season, but it takes more to obtain. It takes more to obtain the fruit of the Spirit when you're in a spiritually dry state too. But you can do that. But where the analogy breaks down is that fruit that you buy from the grocery store is linear. It starts off as a seed and grows into the fruit that you have in your kitchen, right? The fruit of the Spirit are not linear. Because here's the thing, there are some seasons of your life that is marked by growth. You see the evidence of God at work with you and you with God. You see love, joy, peace, patience, all of the things. You see the evidence of this. But then there are also seasons of life where we regress, where we take back the things that we let go of. And you go off on a customer service manager over the phone for keeping you on hold for 4 hours. Like, it's not necessarily a linear thing. But one of the things that Paul says that marks our growth with Jesus, he says, is patience. In fact, I'll read it to you again. We've looked at it every week thus far. This is what Paul defines as the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace. The NIV says forbearance, otherwise known as patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. But out of all of those things, the one that is hardest to muster, especially when you are in a spiritually dry season or a difficult time in your life, is patience. Like, what is the first thing to go in your life when you feel drained? Your patience, right? Have you ever recognized in and of yourself that in a given situation, your patience is shot? Or have you had someone who loves you come up to you and say, "Oh, honey dear, your patience is shot." Right? But patience is about capacity. To grow in patience is to increase your capacity for people. But here's the thing. We all run out of it eventually. But a mark that we are growing with Jesus is to increase our capacity for other people. But some of you have little capacity for people, and it shows. Your growth with Jesus has stagnated, and because your growth with Jesus has stagnated, your patience, your tolerance, your ability to handle other people is very, very small. But to grow in your capacity for people, to have patience for others, you have to understand God's capacity for you. You see, God puts up with a lot when it comes to putting up with you. Because of your stubbornness, your pride, your unwillingness to listen or to learn. Like, God puts up with a lot when it comes to each and every one of us. But one of the ways that we test God's patience, one of the chief ways we test God's patience, is through unrepentant, willful sin. Or we just keep doing the same thing we know we shouldn't do over and over and over again. That wears on God's patience to the extent that sometimes God goes, okay, they're going to have to deal with the consequences of their own sin for a minute to humble them again. Because here's the thing, accountability and patience, they're not mutually exclusive. But God's patience for us is vast. And as we grow in our understanding of how much God has patience towards us, we in turn grow in our capacity to have patience for other people. Now, have you ever heard the phrase, if you ask God for more patience, God gives you situations in which to display patience? Have you ever heard this? Yes, it's true. And it's true because patience is all about growing one's capacity. And like I said, it takes a lot to muster up patience when you are in a spiritually dry or difficult season in life. That's why when you are in the fruitful season of life, where you are growing with God. You need to be intentional to grow in your capacity for people, to work with God, to grow in your patience, so that when the difficult time comes, your patience doesn't shrink as much. Now, something I need you to also understand is that the word patience and forbearance are often interchanged. I preach every week out of the NIV. The NIV translates the word here as forbearance. But forbearance and patience, there's a slightly different connotation to forbearance than patience, because forbearance, if you look it up in the dictionary, it's described like this. It's the action of refraining from exercising a legal right, especially enforcing the payment of a debt. So to have patience for somebody or forbearance for somebody is to be slow to enforce what they owe to you. And people owe us all kinds of things. They owe us respect. They owe us dignity. They owe us apologies. All kinds of stuff. But to grow with Jesus is marked by not rushing to collect on what you are owed, just as God does not rush to collect on what we owe him. But yet some of us, we are quick to call out others for what we perceive that they owe us. But what that does is it proves that our patience runs out really, really fast. But growing with Jesus is to be slower in our approach to other people. Now, I will admit, I displayed an outburst of anger, as Paul described in that passage, instead of forbearance to that particular customer service manager on the phone. I'll admit it. And we've all done that at some point. Whether we've done it on the phone or we have thought it in our hearts, we have certainly been there. But here's the thing. Growing with Jesus is about learning from our mistakes and not continuing to make the same ones over and over again. Because here's the deal. If you handle situations today the same way you did a year ago, or 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, then you're really not growing. And if you're not growing in your faith with Jesus, that means you have become stagnant in your faith. And you need to do something about that. Because a stagnant faith always, always, always leads to problems. Now, one of the hardest parts of growing with Jesus, I've learned, is waiting. In fact, learning to wait on God is one of the most important aspects of being a follower of Christ, and yet it is not talked about nearly enough for how important it is. In the Bible, James, the guy who wrote the epistle James, we believe was Jesus' brother. And so if you read the book of James, he is poignant, he calls people out, but he has this really different take on our relationship with God because he is so blunt, because he was Jesus' brother. And he talks about what it looks like for a Christ follower to wait for Jesus. Look with me, James chapter 5, verses 7 through 11. He says, "Be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains? You too, be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. Don't grumble against one another, brothers or sisters, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. Brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy." So James says, be patient and wait for Jesus. Like in the literal sense that we should be waiting for Jesus to return. So much of the New Testament is telling us as followers of Christ to wait for Jesus' imminent return. We should be expecting it. and be ready for when it happens. So that's in the literal sense. But I think James also means that we should be waiting for God to move in our lives. And he references here the life of Job. If you're not familiar with the life of Job, Job underwent horrible tragedy after horrible tragedy after horrible tragedy in his life, and he kept waiting for God to move. In fact, he expected God to move. He kept bringing God his suffering and saying, God, when are you going to bring an end to this? And Job rooted his experience and the problems that he faced. He weathered through it all through his firm foundation of faith until, if you've read the book of Job, toward the end of the book, Job's faith starts to waver. He starts calling God into question. And just as Job's faith begins to waver, God, in God fashion, showed up just in the nick of time. God has a tendency to show up just as your faith comes to an end. If patience for people is all about growing your capacity, then patience for God is waiting for and expecting him to show up. And God shows up in the nick of time. Now, my first foray into having to wait patiently on God in a really profound way, it was when I was in college. I was having to decide what I was going to do next. For some of you seniors, maybe you've been there in the this past year. You had to decide where you're going after college, and you had to make some big decisions. For me, it was in college going on to grad school. I knew I was going into ministry. I had applied to go to seminary. I had put in my application to Asbury Theological Seminary, and one day, my junior year, I get the letter that not only have I been accepted, but I have been given a full scholarship for my master's degree. I was so excited. I had the letter in hand. I went and told my professors. I went and told all my friends. I was going to school, and it was getting paid for. And then someone from the admissions office called me the week after, and they said, oops, we made a mistake. You did qualify for the scholarship, but the scholarship is only good for those who are going to be on campus, and you have listed yourself as being an online student only, and the scholarship doesn't apply to online students. So you can accept the scholarship, but you're going to have to move to Kentucky to do it. Well, at the time, Amy and I had just started dating. We both grew up on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. I was working at a church. My plan was to kind of see where this relationship was going, to keep working at the church, and to go to school online. And this was going to change that. And they said, oh, by the way, you can accept the scholarship, but you have to let us know in the next 2 weeks. So I went from thinking I had my life figured out to, oh my gosh, I have to figure my life out, and I have 2 weeks to do it. Now, clearly, Amy wanted me to stay, and that was the plan, or I move and take the scholarship. And so for 2 weeks in a row, every day, all throughout the day, I prayed, God, where's your direction? What are you wanting me to do? I'm torn. What should I do? Where are you? Why am I not hearing from you? And for 13 days, I heard nothing. It was the 13th day, the day before I had to let them know my decision, that I finally got a peace from God. It was like, I'm sweating it. Just as my faith begins to falter, God showed up. And he gave me the direction and the peace to go to school, to take the scholarship. Amy wasn't terribly thrilled about it, but we did the long distance thing for a little bit. We got engaged my first year when I was in seminary. We got married that following summer. We moved the girls and her. They moved up to be with me to start our family together. And all of that drastically changed the course of our lives. So that was the first foray into having to patiently wait for God to move and to show up. And he made me sweat it there for a minute, but he proved the point. He arrived. That wasn't the last time. In fact, if life is about growing, then we learn to wait in ever increasingly severe situations. So we got married. Amy and I had talked about wanting to have a child of our own, but there were some health complications that were present with us. And so I was in seminary for 4 years. My 4th year, my wife underwent a surgery in order to allow her to have children again. So that was a whole thing. So surgery in like January, February. I graduated in May. We moved to the Woodlands. I became a pastor at the mega church in the Woodlands. And we're doing life. We're only there for a few months when I find myself alone in a hospital waiting room at 2 a.m. in the morning because Amy has been rushed back for emergency surgery because she had an ectopic pregnancy that had ruptured her tube and she was internally hemorrhaging to death. And I found myself waiting on God in a new way. I was all alone. Just me and God. I mean, we had just moved to the Woodlands, so I didn't know anybody who to call. We didn't have family there. The girls were not understanding quite the gravity of what we were dealing with at the hospital. In fact, when we had gotten to the emergency room and the surgeon's like, I'm calling in a surgical team right now to take care of this. And I said, time out. Our insurance doesn't like this hospital. We need to go to Methodist for our insurance. And he looked at me in the eye, and I'll never forget. He said, she won't make the drive. So I found myself alone in the entire wing of the hospital by myself, 2 a.m., praying, God, you led us down this path. And I need you to show up. I need you to save my wife. Don't fail me now. And I prayed that over and over and over again for hours. Finally, the surgeon came out. They said they were able to stop the bleeding. She would be okay, but the recovery was going to be a thing. In follow-up consultations, she was told because of the scarring that she would have a 1 in 10 chance to have a child naturally. But we kept praying, kept the faith for a few more years until we ran out of faith. We kind of hit that point together as a couple of going, this probably is not going to happen for us. We've prayed. We've done all the right things. It's just not happening. And so, God, maybe this isn't your plan for us. And just as our faith kind of hit that breaking point, it was almost 2 years to the day of her emergency surgery. It was a Sunday morning, and I was in between church services, and I get a text from my wife with a picture of a positive pregnancy test and a caption that says, shh, don't tell anybody. Woman, do you know what I do for a living? I got to go preach again and you don't want me to say anything? So when you see Ava Grace walking around, she for us is the physical embodiment of God showing up just in the nick of time. Just when our faith faltered, God came through. Friends, the Christian life is filled with patiently waiting for God to move. And his movement looks different in various ways. It presents itself in various forms at different times. Yet God will often grow your capacity by allowing your faith to be tested. And I don't think he causes the testing, but I do believe he allows it. So friends, growing with Jesus usually means learning to wait when waiting is hard. And the outcomes aren't always what we expect either. Still, God arrives in different ways and in various forms just when our faith begins to fail. Yet if your faith and your patience last longer than it did the last time, that means you're headed down the right path. God is growing you. And as he grows you, he grows your ability to be used by him. In fact, James, he says, we count as blessed those who have persevered. Persevering means you've gone through something. Friends, may you learn to persevere through what you're going through. May you learn to keep waiting in the midst of the hard stuff. And may God show up in your life and in your story in just the nick of time. And to my graduates in the room, if you learn to wait for God when waiting is hard, you will be light years ahead of your peers. In fact, you'll be way ahead of most adults. And you'll see God move in ways that you would never expect in this next season of life. And let's be honest, post-high school, it's usually the most exciting time in your life. But it can also be the most fruitful time in your life with God if you choose it. So look for God in the decisions that you're going to have to make, because your decisions now carry a lot bigger consequences to everything about your life. Look for God in the midst of those. Wait for him. Have patience for yourself. Learn to have patience for others. And I promise you, it will pay off in the end.